All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is 7:30 this week on a Tuesday evening instead of it being on a Monday evening, but let us get started. Welcome to lesson 2 of this JLI course, Outsmarting Antisemitism. Tonight's class is called No Apologies. Just by way of introduction, you may detect a small sniffle in my voice. I want to be abundantly clear that I was tested for the coronavirus approximately 6 times since last Wednesday, and all of them have come back conclusively negative. We live in a world where people do catch colds, and it's not COVID, so I will do my very best not to cough on any of you, but rest assured that I am just sniffling. I was out of town for the Chabad conference. I want to thank you all for your flexibility in being here tonight, but let us get underway. Tonight, we're going to be talking about hating Jews. We're going to lay down the following principles, which you're welcome to disagree with, but I'm going to argue that this would be true. We're going to lay down the following principles about anti-Semitism, and that is that by and large, when we speak about the realities that motivate anti-Semitism, it's important to remember 3 things. Number 1, these claims are ancient. Number 2, these claims are absurd. And most importantly, and I think directly tying into number 2, these claims usually are contradictory. Before we delve into what about them are ancient, absurd, and contradictory, I think it's vital that I make 2 quite obvious disclaimers when we talk about what motivates people hating Jews. Number one is Israel. But Rabbi, Israel, the politicians, apartheid, colonizers. We're going to talk about Israel exclusively next week. So when we speak about any thought process that somehow justifies hating Jews being based in political arguments against Israel's governments or various politicians, let's leave that off the table for today, and we will talk about that next Monday, number 1. Number 2, let me go out and from the outset make the following acknowledgments. Bernard Madoff was a Jew. Jeffrey Epstein was a Jew. Harvey Weinstein is a Jew. These are 3 men who have done horrible, unspeakable things. I don't believe that to point that out qualifies as anti-Semitism. I will say, though, that pointing out that these individuals did horrible things, somehow using that talking point to reflect on an entire nation and their characteristics and their behavior, in my opinion, is the equivalent of my going to the local NAACP chapter and saying that the entire African-American community are murderers because the young man who killed Aaron Lowe, the University of Utah football player in September, was African-American. I believe that that's a straight line if you want to use that comparison. So obviously, there are sadly members of the Jewish faith who have done unspeakable things throughout the years and even in very, very, very recent history. To use that as some sort of justification to hate 18 million people around the world, to hate anybody who subscribes to a particular philosophy is asinine. And I think we can all agree to that. So, ancient, absurd, and contradictory. I think ancient is the key point that we'll start with. Why is that? Because we'd like to believe, or some of us would like to believe, that anti-Semitism is actually an invention of the Christian faith. After the Jewish people got rid of the Christian savior, as some sort of recompense for that reality, Christians began hating Jews. And so I think on a certain level, people would make the argument that, well, yes, the Jews in Utah in 2021 didn't kill the Christian savior, but it's somehow justified because many years ago someone did. And so again, perhaps hating all Jews because of that is somehow justified. To debunk the fallacy of that whole line of reasoning, we're going to introduce 2 very, very interesting texts in the beginning. The first one is from an ancient historian from the Roman Empire who was called Tacitus. And he talks about the history of the Jewish people in the history of the Roman Empire. We're then going to introduce a text from the Jewish historian Josephus. Josephus wrote a book, or he wrote a a work, I don't know if they had books back then, called Against Apion. Apion was a Hellenized Egyptian philosopher who wrote some lovely things about the Jewish people, and Josephus was an ancient Jewish historian, debunked a lot of what Apion wrote. We're going to be going through these two texts together, first from Tacitus and then from Josephus. Here in the teacher's manual, they encourage us to encourage you to use a pen or a pencil to underline the anti-Semitic tropes that you come across in text 1 or 2. One of my colleagues told me that he had a class recently where they did this, and he played a game with his students that in text 1 and 2, every time they came across an anti-Semitic trope, someone had to take a drink. And it was a very, very lively class that followed. So I'm not going to put you guys to the task, but Mike's already gone through his single malt. But yes, through text 1 and text 2, when you come across an anti-Semitic trope, just underline it for me. Let's see where this takes us. Text 1, page 48. Jacob, you're welcome to drink. I see your eyes lit up at that notion. You're welcome to do what you like back in. Text 1. Once during a plague in Egypt, which caused bodily disfigurement, King, I'm going to botch this, Baccharis approached the oracle of Ammon and asked for a remedy, whereupon he was told to purge his kingdom and to transport this race into other lands, since it was hateful to the gods. So the Hebrews were searched out and gathered together. Then, being abandoned in the desert, while all others lay idle and weeping, one only of the exiles, Moses by name, warned them not to hope for help from gods or men, for they were deserted by both, but to trust to themselves. The Jews regard as profane all that we hold sacred. On the other hand, they permit all that we abhor. They first chose to rest on the 7th day, but after a time they were led by the charms of indolence to give over the 7th year as well to inactivity. The other customs of the Jews are base and abominable, and owe their persistence to their depravity. For the worst rascals among other people, renouncing their ancestral religions, always kept sending tribute and contributions to Jerusalem, thereby increasing the wealth of the Jews. I'm going to pause for a second. This text was written 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, you hear the words, the wealth of the Jews, and we talk about how these claims are ancient and absurd. Like, the wealth of the Jews could totally belong in a tweet in 2021. It's amazing how a lot of these realities have just been in place since the beginning of time. I digress. Again, the Jews are extremely loyal toward one another and always ready to show compassion. But toward every other people, they feel only hate and enmity. If you thought that was good, let's continue. Text number 2 on page 50. They tell lies and invent absurd calumnies about our temple, without showing any consciousness of impiety. Yet to high-minded men, nothing is more disgraceful than a lie of any description, but above all on the subject of a temple of worldwide fame and commanding sanctity. Within this sanctuary, Apion had the effrontery to assert that the Jews kept an ass's head, worshiping that animal and deeming it worthy of the deepest reverence. The fact was disclosed, he maintains, on the occasion of the spoliation of the temple by Antiochus Epiphanes. Was actually Antiochus from the story of Hanukkah, which we'll celebrate soon, when the head made of gold and worth a high price was discovered. Now, how did it escape him that the facts convict him of telling an incredible lie? He adds a second story of Greek origin, which is a malicious slander upon us from beginning to end. In their anxiety to defend Antiochus, they have further invented to discredit us the fictitious story which follows. Apion, who is there the spokesman of others, asserts that Antiochus found in the temple a couch on which a man was reclining. The king's entry was instantly hailed by him with adoration, as about to procure him profound relief. Falling at the king's knees, he stretched out his right hand and implored him to set him free. He said that he was a Greek, and that while traveling about the province for his livelihood, he was suddenly kidnapped by men of a foreign race and conveyed to the temple. There he was shut up and seen by nobody, but was fattened on feasts of the most lavish description. At first, these unlooked-for attentions deceived him and caused him pleasure. Suspicion followed, then consternation. Finally, on consulting the attendants who waited upon him, he heard of the unutterable law of the Jews, for the sake of which he was being fed. Practice was repeated annually at a fixed season. They would kidnap a Greek foreigner, fatten him up for a year, and then lead him to a certain wood where they slew him, sacrificed his body with their customary ritual, partook of his flesh, and while immolating the Greeks, swore an oath of enmity to the Greeks. The remains of their victim were then thrown into a pit. The man stated that he had now but a few days left to live and implored the king, out of respect for the gods of Greece, to defeat this Jewish plot upon his lifeblood and to deliver him from his miserable predicament. Fools must be refuted not by arguments but by facts. Here then we have rank impiety at its worst and a gratuitous lie, designed to mislead persons who do not trouble to investigate the facts. I love the whole passionate speech given and then concluded with fools must be refuted not by arguments but by facts, that the Jewish people love nothing more than a good Greek goyish barbecue. It's one of our delicacies, is fattened Greek. We kidnap one of them, we fatten them up, and then we anoint them with something first. We sacrifice them, partake of their flesh, no anointments. Okay, anti-Semitic tropes in texts 1 and 2. What did we get? Well, I think we'll find, as we pointed out whilst we were reading it, that a lot of the basis for anti-Semitic garbage, which lives on well in 2021, actually can trace its sources back 2,000 years. Let's go over some of them together. Number one, the source of all societal problems is who? The Jews. If you live in a society, any society, and that society has problems and you have Jews in your midst, well, good news. It's probably the Jews' fault. In fact, I think a lot of what we read in texts 1 and 2, if we want to think back to more relevant times, one can really see up close and personal the front cover of the Nazi newspaper, the Stürmer, the Jews are our misfortune. One really wants to get current. It will take me approximately 30 seconds on social media to dig up any sort of post blaming the Jews for COVID-19. Someone's got to explain to me how quite that happens, but hey, if there's a societal problem, very often it's blamed on the Jews. Number two, they're lazy. Yes, came across that in text number 1. They don't do anything. They take off the 7th day, and then in the brazen act of insolence, they take off a whole 7th year and work for a whole year. They're just lazy. The Jews are lazy. They are rejected by the gods. Well, we live in a pretty ungodly culture in today's day and age. This is, I think, a more historical trope that we don't see so much in present day. But throughout the Middle Ages, a lot of persecutions, a lot of the violence that was perpetrated against the Jewish people was blamed on this. They were rejected by the gods, and it is us, the subjects of the gods. It is our responsibility to carry out the wrath and the vengeance of the gods and to purge the Jews who had been rejected by the gods.
Isn't it the inverse? Isn't it that they, the real God has, I mean, it's not they are rejected by the God, but they reject the real God, which is.
A good point. I would say it's probably a two-way street. They've rejected the true God, and thus,
That's right.
I'm not fired, I quit. Because they rejected the true God, they have been rejected by the God as well. And so I guess it's kind of a two-way street in that sense. So yes, it's what came first. Were they rejected or did they do the rejecting? One can make that argument, but be it as it may, they and the gods don't have a very positive relationship.
Where do you get gods? Because you're dealing with a monotheistic environment. Most of the known world at the time
only had one God? Right, so I think if I understand your question correctly, Mike, it would be rejected by God in the singular. I would agree with that, actually. I would agree with that. Actually, very profound. I think history bears that out, especially when we look at the Middle Eastern persecutions, the Spanish Inquisition chief among them. We know that it was usually rejected by God in the singular. So I actually very much agree with your point. Number 4, opposing values. We just can't set one foot forward, right? We can't do anything right. If society tells us that we should be doing this, the Jews are always doing that. And if society wants to do that, the Jews always seem to be doing this. We just can't go along together. They're wealthy. One of my favorites. The Jews are wealthy, the wealth of the Jews, and because one of the things they do with their profound wealth is they love to rip off the goyim. Yes, the Jews love to rip off the non-Jews. I think it's really part of, they're wealthy and they rip off the non-Jews, and these things kind of come hand in hand. And more importantly, one of the things that they do beyond ripping off non-Jews is they hate non-Jews. I love the fact that a nation of 18 million people on God's good earth that has almost 8 billion people. I love how somehow, there's been this accusation leveled against, the small minority of mankind that we've somehow decided to gang up against the other, 7 billion people on the face of the earth and hate the Goyim. But sure, they hate the non-Jews. And here we come to perhaps the most egregious one at all, and really the one that has been the greatest justification for violence is the cruel rituals, the kidnapping of the Greeks, slaughtering the Greeks to their gods, which is really kind of the predecessor of the blood libels around matzah, that the Jews would make their bread with the blood of Christian children. Laura has a question. Was there significant anti-Semitism prior to the crucifixion of Jesus? I just noticed the word fiction in crucifixion. I believe there was, yes. A lot of these texts, Laura, predate the crucifixion, and that's kind of the point that's being made over here. I heard a joke recently pertaining to the Jews being wealthy and that they rip off the non-Jews. There's 2 Jewish men who are walking by the church in town. And the church has a big sign in the front yard, convert today and receive $100. Before they were incentivizing people to get the COVID vaccine, they were incentivizing people to convert. So Yankel turns to Isaac and he says, you know what? I could really use $100. I'm going to go do this. And so Yankel goes inside the church and Isaac waits very patiently outside. And about 10 minutes later, Yankel comes out and Isaac says, no, did they pay you the $100? Yankel looks at Isaac and he says, it's all about the money with you people. Yes. More importantly, the notion that these claims are somehow absurd has not detracted from the basis that people have placed on these claims and acted upon them. Let's read text 3 for a second. From a professor who talks a little bit about anti-Semitism. Yes?
So I think there is a point that is missing from this list.
Sure.
Which is in text 1 and which is also in what Aman says to the king, and which is today, I think, is the most one is the contribution to Jerusalem. And it's basically the dual loyalty.
Yes.
It's like they're not completely what they pretend.
Sure,
At one point they have a dual loyalty to some.
I would roll that back into opposing values. There's always kind of been this sentiment that the Jewish people don't care about what they're supposed to care about. So, if they're in America, they have this loyalty to Israel as opposed to having a loyalty to America. I agree with you. I think, and to your point, I think it is the most pervasive in today's society. But I would kind of roll that into opposing values. They're not able to think about issues cohesively as we do. Text 3, Susan, go ahead, if you don't mind reading for us, aloud, please. Page 53.
Conspiracy theories are rarely logical. It is not surprising then that even as Al-Qaeda took credit for the September 11th attacks, the group did nothing to stop a rumor claiming that the Jews were really responsible. The rumor alleged that Israel, specifically Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, was behind the plot and had warned Jews not to go to work at the World Trade Center on the day of the attacks. On September 18th, an editor for a website known as the Information Times posted a message claiming that the terrorist government of Israel, cannot be ruled out as a suspect. The editor did not identify a motive or provide evidence in support of his allegation. In other words, he was simply raising a reasonable question. 5 days later, Al-Manar,
Yes.
a TV station based in Lebanon, said that Mossad had indeed warned 4,000 Jews who worked at the World Trade Center to stay home on September 11th. Within days, that rumor appeared in newspapers and electronic mailing lists around the world. People continue to believe that the lie, despite the fact that about 18% of the known dead were identified in obituaries as Jews.
Absurd.
Wow.
But that doesn't seem to bother people. What really should get your goat is the notion that so many of these claims, beyond them being absolutely asinine on their face, not just that, but they're actually inherently contradictory. That we'll take a look at today's lesson.
On the east bank of the Vistula River, in the Warsaw suburb of Prague. A Jewish boy was born in 1883 and named Menachem, he who brings comfort. His father, Elazar Zeba, died shortly after, and the boy was raised by his grandfather. He became rapidly known as a dazzling genius and formidable Torah scholar, corresponding with the best Torah minds of his era. Menachem Zeba married at age 18. His wealthy father-in-law supported him for 20 years while he studied and put pen to paper, authoring over 10,000 pages of original Torah insights, including commentaries on Maimonides' magnum opus and on the Jerusalem Talmud, and 4 volumes of halachic responsa. His fame spread globally. He was offered rabbinical positions, including the office of the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, but he humbly shunned leadership. Leadership was thrust upon him in 1935 by order of the Grand Rabbi of Ger. The humble rabbi joined the Warsaw Rabbinate and proved his worth, becoming a world authority on Jewish law and a foremost spokesman for Polish Jewry. Before reaching age 40, Rabbi Zeba was appointed honorary secretary to Moretzes Gedolei HaTorah, the Council of Great Torah Sages, populated by sages twice his age. In 1937, he twice addressed the full assemblage and was treated with awe. Then the Nazis arrived. Jewish Warsaw was reduced to a ghetto. 460,000 people were imprisoned in just 1.3 square miles. Starvation, disease, deportation, murder. Despite repeated offers of escape, Rabbi Zeba refused to abandon his flock. For them, he was a rare pillar of comfort. As one of a handful of rabbis who survived in the ghetto until his final days, he rallied his desperate brethren with powerful messages of hope and determination. He recorded an insight into the nature of anti-Semitism before the war. In light of his subsequent experiences under Nazi depravity, his words ring with timeless poignancy. There are those who seek to identify legitimate causes for the hatred of Jews. However, reality has shown that there is no legitimate reason. Anti-Semitism has no justifiable cause. The haters simply choose to hate God's people. This is demonstrated by the fact that Jews are hated for being capitalists and also for being socialists. They are hated because they are overly ambitious and sharp-minded, and also because they are indolent and parasitic. They are hated because they are too religious and conservative, and also because they advance progressive and secular ideas. The reasons for this hatred are consistently contradictory and have not an ounce of logic behind them. Shortly before Passover, 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising erupted. Amid furious fighting and flames, Rabbi Zeba calmly conducted a Passover seder as if nothing was amiss. But on the 5th day of Passover, April 24th, 1943, Rabbi Zeba was gunned down by Nazi bullets. The community he shepherded with love and sacrifice came together at terrible risk to bury their beloved rabbi in a temporary grave. His family was deported to Treblinka. None survived. His lifetime of copious writings rose to heaven in the Warsaw fires. Hardly any of it survived. In 1958, his body was exhumed. Tens of thousands of people amassed, including an array of leading Jewish sages, to lay the heroic rabbi to eternal rest in dignity. Reality has proven that this righteous man was right. There is no legitimate reason for the hatred leveled in each generation against the innocent men, women, and children of the Jewish people.
So text 4 is actually what we just read. It was up there on the screen. I'm not going to go through it again. But Rabbi Zeba makes a very fundamental point. Pick any contemporary issue of any time period, figure out where people are aligned on that issue, and if you really want to stoke anti-Jewish hatred, just put them on the wrong side of the issue. People have hated Jews because they are socialists. People have also hated Jews because the Jews are capitalists. People have hated Jews because they are overly ambitious. People have also hated Jews because they are too lazy. People have hated Jews because they are overly religious. People have also hated Jews because they are overly secular. Does any of that make sense to anybody? I'm going to tell the story that the premier of Poland was meeting with President Wilson, Woodrow Wilson, to discuss some of the issues that he was having around the time of World War I, and he was trying to get his way from President Wilson. He says, look, President Wilson, I have to tell you, if my demands are not met at their fullest, there's a good chance that the people of my country will resort to some not such pretty measures. In fact, there's a strong likelihood that out of their rage, they will all get drunk and massacre the Jews. So President Wilson asked his Polish counterpart, and what will happen if I do meet your demands? So he says, well, my people will probably go out and celebrate, and then they're going to all get drunk and they're going to massacre the Jews. And the point is, whichever way you want to look at the issue, the Jews will end up undoubtedly on the wrong side of it. You know, this is a funny story they tell about Poland. In fact, the Medrash tells us a story that Hadrian, the great anti-Semitic emperor, was once walking in the streets of Rome, and a Jew walked past him and greeted the emperor out of respect. And the emperor said, who are you? And the man said, I'm a Jew. And the emperor said, a Jew dares to greet the emperor? Off with his head. So they killed the Jew. Short few hours later, there was another Jew in town who was walking past the emperor and heard what happened. So what did he do? He didn't greet the emperor. And the emperor sees this man walk past and says, excuse me, what are you? The man says, I'm a Jew. And the Jew said, and the emperor says, a Jew walks past the emperor and doesn't offer a word of greeting? Off with his head. The story goes that the ministers were standing there and they said, so which is it? Are the Jews meant to greet you or not meant to greet you? He says, the ministers dare question how the emperor runs his kingdom? Off with your head. The point of the story is there's no right or wrong behavior. Ultimately, the Jewish conduct very often results in off with their heads. All this being the reality, that by and large, the anti-Semitic claims, which are the basis for such negative behavior, are ancient, absurd, and contradictory, should leave us with two very, very powerful points. Point number one, hardcore haters will not allow themselves to be confused with the facts. Michael, read for us, please, text 5 from our good friend Dr. Lipstadt from last week, page 56.
Upon reading anti-Semitic slanders and lies, beg your pardon, it is hard, if not impossible, to explain something that is essentially irrational, delusional, and absurd. That is the nature of all conspiracy theories, of which anti-Semitism is just one. Think about it. Why do some people insist that the moon landings took place on a stage set someplace in the American West? Despite the existence of reams of scientific and personal evidence to the contrary, they believe this because they subscribe to the notion that the government and other powerful entities are engaged in vast conspiracies to fool the public. If we were to provide these conspiracy theorists with evidence that proves the landing was indeed on the moon, they would a priori dismiss what we say and assume we are part of the conspiracy. To try and defeat an irrational supposition, especially when it is firmly held by its proponents, with a rational explanation is virtually impossible. Any information that does not correspond with the conspiracy theorists' preferred social, political, or ethnic narratives is ipso facto false. Social scientists have described such theories as having a self-sealing quality that makes them particularly immune to challenge.
I think we all know this, right? We live in a world where there are certain people who take a position on a specific issue that there is no room for discussion. And the moment that you attempt to have any sort of substantive conversation on the topic, what's ultimately the assertion they arrive at when you provide them with reason? Aha, you too are in on this joke. What? No, no, what, can we attempt to talk about this? No. If you don't believe me, if you don't agree with me, you too are part of the vast conspiracy that is being perpetrated against humanity. And so, to put it in the terms of the social scientists, this is a self-sealing quality. It's not something which can be argued with. Undoubtedly, there are people out there that are susceptible to reason. Undoubtedly, there are people out there that believe some of these contradictory or absurd themes that we've talked about that are open to actually being awoken to the reality. I would describe those people as an overwhelming minority. Go to any anti-Semite who believes that the Jews control the weather and try to have a conversation as to how exactly that works. You're not going to get anywhere. There's no point of reason where the conversation somehow turns on its head. It is a self-sealing quality.
So, but,
Yes, Elon.
sorry. Do you actually agree with that sentence that anti-Semitism is just one conspiracy theory? I mean,
Yes.
it's just one.
I believe, yes.
They did not have like a different even statue or even like a different context than any. I mean, do you really think that anti-Semitism is exactly like some people that thought that the moon landing? I mean, the moon landing people or the flat Earth people, they're not consumed by the hate.
So that's an excellent point. I think the difference between, let's say, anti-Semitism or flat earthers or the moon conspiracy theorist guys, the difference is people who believe that the earth is flat don't believe that that rationale somehow justifies violence against a particular group of people. So you can believe the earth is flat, and great. Once a year, there will be a conference of flat earthers that you're encouraged to attend, and you can share all the stuff on Facebook, and awesome and great. And okay, like, yeah, like, good for you. Like, if you believe that the moon landing was staged, great. Like, maybe you'll wear a T-shirt to that effect. That's it. And furthermore, no one's going to get offended by that belief. Like, I can't ever like imagine the scene. Someone's walking in a mall with with a T-shirt that says the moon landing was staged, and someone punches them in the face because like the moon landing wasn't staged. So most of these conspiracy theories, people believe in them very profoundly, but that belief doesn't require any sort of action as a result of that. Anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory that because people believe that the Jews are wealthy, lazy, and whatever else, that somehow entitles them to act against them in a certain way. So I think that's what really separates anti-Semitism from these other conspiracy theories, is the justification for violence or for other provocative behavior as a result of that conspiracy theory. But in a certain sense, in terms of its factual validity, I would put it in the same box. Okay? More importantly, and I think number two is so crucial. The second powerful reality that we should arrive at based on what we've been talking is the understanding of how misleading the terms anti-Semitism or anti-Semite truly are. Anti-Semitism, in a certain sense, is an attempt to put lipstick on a pig. If you have a legitimate belief that something, a thought process, a group of people are somehow in the wrong, you are given a title that somehow justifies your belief. Okay, I want to leave COVID out of this for a second because COVID is obviously a very, very intense topic. But let's take the original anti-vaxxers, right? So for many, many years, children are vaccinated. Children, before they can attend school, in any civilized society, have to receive certain immunizations. There are people that believe that requirement is, I don't know, not grounded in science. And you have kind of the spectrum of the anti-vaxxers. Some will say that it's just there to enrich the doctors, and other people will tell you that these vaccines cause autism, and other people will tell you that it's just part of the vast Chinese conspiracy to brainwash us. So these people have taken upon themselves a title.
Some of them are like people from Amish community.
Sure. Some of them have religious beliefs. Sure, right. These people have taken upon themselves a title. They are anti-vaxxers. There's an idea out there that you should vaccinate your children. There are people who believe that the science which leads to that need is somehow flawed. They are anti-vaxxers. Anti-Semitism is a glorified way of describing a racist. Anti-Semitism is a glorified way of saying that someone is a hater. Now, the crazy thing is that there's actually videos where you hear people take that position. There are people who espouse anti-Semitic tropes, and someone will say to them, wow, you really, this reeks of racism. And someone will say, no, this isn't racism. This is anti-Semitism. Well, okay. What's the difference? If I get up and I say that I hate people of a certain skin color, that is racism. No one likes racism. Racism is a big no-no in our society. Don't ever be called a racist. I'm not a racist. I'm an anti-Semite. And that's somehow different. Actually, if you look in all Jewish books, they'll tell you absolutely not. Rick, read for us text 6.
What's in a name? Wilhelm Marr, German writer, political theorist, and agitator. In 1879, Marr founded the Anti-Semites League, the first organization devoted exclusively to promoting political anti-Semitism. Marr's organization reflected his secular racism, which existed inconsistently alongside his religious anti-Semitism. His self-proclaimed goal was, quote, to free Christianity from the yoke of Judaism. Marr coined the term antisemitism, which for him denoted a secular racial hatred of Jews. He used the word anti-Semitism to make Jew hatred seem rational, sanctioned by science, polite, like a theory.
Imagine for a moment, I got off a plane yesterday. Nowadays, planes are such volatile areas because it's let people, I don't understand why people do this, why they send, I'm going to totally go off topic here. People get on a plane and think they're not going to wear the mask. Like, it's pretty well documented that if you don't wear the mask on the plane, you're not going to fly. Now, you're welcome not to fly. You can drive anywhere in this country and you can swim across the ocean, but if you're going to get on a plane, you're going to wear the mask. And it's remarkable to me how, planes have become such a sensitive spot. Imagine for a moment I get on a plane and I refuse to wear a seatbelt. They say, sir, I'm sorry, you have to wear a seatbelt. I'm sorry, I am anti-seatbelts. No, you're not, you're an idiot. No, I'm not an idiot. I am anti-seatbelts. I have thought of very, very philosophical reality grounded in science and in common sense, which says that seatbelts are the leading cause of cancer in children ages 5 to 12 in sub-Saharan Africa, and blah, 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 and I'm anti-seatbelts. You're a moron. Anti-seatbelts. Wear the seatbelt. If you don't want to wear the seatbelt, you don't have to fly on the plane. But we can take any position, as ridiculous as it may be, and if we somehow dress it up, it becomes more justified. You're not just breaking the rules. No, you're anti-seatbelts. You're espousing a political philosophy.
Yeah, I think this is a misreading of that passage, because what is happening in 1879 is that this is the time when Jews, for the first time in Europe, are actually allowed to participate in civil society.
Correct.
Bonaparte is giving the right to, he's basically saying, I have nothing against Jews as an individual, but against people. And so then Jews are becoming invisible, which they weren't before. So up to the beginning of the 19th century, middle 19th century and 20th century, Jews were very much in ghetto in Europe and almost everywhere in Europe. And so it was very clear who was a Jew, who was not a Jew, and it was very easy. And so the objection for Jewish people at that time was most religious. The threat of Jews at that point is because they become invisible. I mean, and so they become invisible because they assimilate in society. And so this is why this guy is saying, no, I'm against a secular. He doesn't want to oppose the Jews on a religious basis. He wants to oppose the Jews on a secular basis. And so it's a movement that is just a reflection of the assimilation of the Jew, because now, how do you tell?
Right.
You cannot tell
Hold that.
who's a Jew and who's
Hold
not.
that thought. We're gonna get that. We're gonna
And
touch on.
so this is I mean, I think it's just a really important point to make, that this is not
We're gonna
just
touch.
putting a word on the.
We're going to touch on that exact point later on tonight. Hold that thought for 1 second, okay? I want to wrap this up because we are falling a little bit behind. I want to take a look at text 7 for a second. Just a little bit of context. In the late 17th century, there was a non-Jew in Hamburg, Germany, who was sentenced to death. Why was he sentenced to death? Because he had killed 2 innocent Jewish men in the marketplace. Citizens of Hamburg could not believe that such a verdict was handed down, and one of their own was going to be put to death for murdering the Jews, and so they rioted. This is a diary of a Jewish businesswoman who describes those riots. Text 7, page 58. On the day the murderer was sentenced to death, there was a commotion in Hamburg that had not been seen there for 100 years over any man sentenced to death. The lives of all Jews were endangered due to the extreme rishus, evil and wickedness that has been roused. And I think the key point from this text is, the woman didn't say, oh, in the middle of Hamburg, there was a rally promoting anti-Semitism. No, there was wickedness. Someone killed 2 men, and so he was being sentenced to death. People were being sentenced to death every Monday and Thursday in Hamburg. And yet, for the first time, there was an uprising of evil and wickedness surrounding a perfectly rational death sentence. That is not anti-Semitism. That is wickedness. And so I think, bearing in mind a lot of the realities that we have come to, should really give us a little bit of context as to how to really properly understand the roots of this disease. Now, just for the point of clarity, we're going to keep using the term anti-Semitism throughout this class. I think referring to it as evil would just get a little confusing, but I think we all agree that referring to this thing called anti-Semitism might be a little bit of a mystery. So, we've talked a little bit about the fact that anti-Semitism is not really grounded in reality. It's not grounded in rationale. Why indeed does it exist? So it's not because the Jews are ambitious or lazy or wealthy or poor or socialist or capitalist or anything of the sort. Why indeed do people have such an issue with the Jewish people? That's what we're going to try to spend the rest of this evening's discussion talking about and really try to get into. Why? Why do people have such an issue with the Jewish people? Well, the first person to take a stab at that is going to be Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. Who are we up to? Antonino, text number 8, page 60.
Multiple explanation. There has been an almost endless set of speculations about what the cause of anti-Semitism actually is. Some have seen it in psychological terms: displaced fear, externalization of inner conflict, projected guilt, the creation of a scapegoat. Others have given it a socio-political explanation. Jews were a group who could conveniently be blamed for economic resentments, social unrest, class conflict, or destabilizing change. Yet others view it through the prism of culture and identity. Jews were the stereotyped outsiders against whom a group could define itself. Yet others, noting the concentration of anti-Semitism among the very faiths, Christianity and Islam, that trace their descent to Abraham and Judaism, favor a Freudian explanation in terms of the myth of Oedipus. We seek to kill those who gave us birth. It would be strange indeed a so complex a phenomenon did not give rise to multiple explanations.
So Lord Rabbi Sachs posits, he offers 4 different hypothetical explanations for anti-Semitism whilst acknowledging that this list could go on and on and on all day. But Rabbi Sachs is of the position that there might be 4 different motives for anti-Semitism: psychological, socio-political, cultural, and religious. Obviously, Lord Rabbi Sachs is correct in his assessment, but whilst I'm not going to argue with the foundation of any of these different lines of reasoning tonight, we're going to tackle an altogether different approach. We're going to talk about the Torah's approach to anti-Semitism. Why Torah believes anti-Semitism is so rampant and what that has to do with us, how we might alter our perspective based on Torah's perspective of this notion. And again, our source for this insight is going to be the story of Purim, the prototype for anti-Semitism. There's a very, very missed detail in the story of Purim. We know that Haman wants to kill the Jews, right? Everyone knows that Haman wants to kill the Jews. There's a very, very powerful detail in the story, which usually kind of just gets run over in the wider narrative. Haman goes to Achashverosh and says, Achashverosh, it's important for me that we kill the Jews. I'd like to get rid of them. Now, I will acknowledge that killing the Jews might be somehow inconvenient for you. Why? The Jews pay tax. If I'm going to wipe out the Jews, I'm wiping out a whole bucket load of taxpayers. There's a lot of money that's going to be short from the king's coffers if I wipe out the Jews. So I have an offer to make you, Achashverosh, your majesty. I will pay you 10,000 silver coins to wipe out the Jews. I will supplement the shortfall in taxes that will arise because of my plan. What does the king say back? First of all, as it pertains to killing the Jews, absolutely, with pleasure, no problem. And then he adds something else. The silver you can keep, and the people do with them as you please. I don't need your money. I don't need your money. In fact, I'm so eager to get rid of them, I could care less about the tax shortfall. Keep your silver, Haman. I'm not bothered by the deficit that will be created by wiping them. The Medrash, I should probably take that back. The Talmud analyzes this conversation and provides a powerful analogy for the roles played by Haman and Achashverosh. Joan, read for us, if you don't mind, text 9 on page 61 from the Talmud in the Tractate of Megillah.
You can use the parable to gain insight into the respective positions of Ahasuerus and Haman. They are similar to 2 individuals, one of whom has a tall mound in his field, whereas the other has a ditch in his field. The owner of the ditch mused to himself, I wish I could buy the tall mound to fill up my ditch. The owner of the mound said to himself, I wish I could purchase the right to dump my mound into this ditch. Not long thereafter, the 2 met. The owner of the ditch said, sell me your mound. The owner of the mound said, take it for free. You'll do me a favor.
Says the Talmud, the shidduch, the match between Achashverosh and Haman, it's a match made in heaven. One guy has a mound, one guy has a pile. Pile meets the empty hole in the field. It's perfect. Perfect. I don't even have to pay you for it. I am looking for dirt. You have dirt. It's a match made in heaven. Jewish mysticism takes a look at this story and says, beyond when the Talmud provides an analogy, when any Torah source provides an analogy for a certain idea, it has to share with us deeper insight into the story. If the point the Talmud is making is that, wow, Haman and Achashverosh were perfect for each other, it need not bring an analogy to that. There has to be something deeper learned from the analogy. Furthermore, in the story, in the analogy brought by the Talmud, what is Haman? Haman is the guy who has a hole. Haman is looking for something to put into the hole. While in reality, Haman wasn't looking to take something up. Haman was looking to annihilate and destroy. So why in the analogy Talmud brings is Haman compared to the person who wanted to supplement something that was missing? Explains Jewish mysticism. There are two types of anti-Semites in this world, and they can be referred to as the pile and the ditch. Achashverosh, who throughout Jewish thought is referred to as a real nudnik. Achashverosh was known to be a very foolish king. Achashverosh is one form of anti-Semitism, typical racism and xenophobia. He sees the Jews as a pile in his field. He just wants to get rid of it. He's got this beautiful field stretching from today till tomorrow, and there's just a blockage in the middle. There's this pile of dirt. He's got nothing to do. It's just get rid of it. I will pay someone to get rid of this pile in my field. Achashverosh is the anti-Semite who sees the Jewish people as a clump of dirt that I'd just like to be rid of. It just doesn't belong here. It doesn't add anything to this field. I just need to get rid of it. Typical racism and xenophobia. Now, if all the non-Jews in this world, if every anti-Semite in this world had Achashverosh anti-Semitism, had pile anti-Semitism, it would be cause for concern. It would be a little disheartening that we have to live our lives amongst people who view us as this pile that just is in the way of things. But explains Jewish mysticism, there's something more profound. There's a more profound level of anti-Semitism. And that is ditch anti-Semitism. Explain Jewish mysticism, Haman had a ditch in his life. Haman had a void in his life. Haman had a hole in his life. And Haman couldn't figure out how to fill that void. So you know what Haman wanted to do? He wanted to get rid of the void. Haman, at the time of the story of Purim, was the wealthiest and most powerful man on the face of the earth. We talked about last week that Achashverosh ruled over the entire inhabited and settled world at that point. Haman was the wealthiest and most powerful man on the face of God's good earth. In the kingdom, in the entire kingdom of Achashverosh, there was an edict passed that whenever someone saw Haman walking by, they needed to prostrate themselves before him. The most powerful and wealthiest man in the world had one problem in life. Let's see it straight out of the words of the text of the Megillah. Ilana, text 10, page 63.
Haman told them about his magnificent wealth and his many sons, and how the king had promoted him and advanced him above the other officials in royal court. What is more, said Haman, Queen Esther personally prepared a feast, and besides, the king, she did not invite anyone but me. And tomorrow, too, I am invited by her alone. But all this means nothing to me each time I see Mordecai with you sitting at the palace gate. Haman goes home and does therapy with his wife and kids. He tells his wife and kids, I have everything a human being could ask for. Tomorrow I'm having a dinner with the queen. Nobody else in the entire world will be dining with the queen tomorrow but me. And there will be another dinner after that. I have everything anyone could ever ask for. And Haman, in his own words, continues and says, what? All this isn't worth it for me. Every time I walk past the king's gate and I don't see Mordecai bow to me. Mordecai was the token man on earth at the time of this story who refused to bow before Haman. And in that moment, everything that Haman had worked for and accumulated in his life meant nothing to him. When Haman saw Mordecai, Haman developed a ditch in his heart. Haman realized at that moment that with all the money and all the power and all the prestige that he had accumulated, there was something fundamental missing in his life. And that was purpose. And Mordecai, who did not have all of the money and did not have all of the power that Haman had, Mordecai had somehow found that purpose. When Haman saw someone that lived their lives by a code
and by virtue of that code refused to bow to another human being, that reality of living a life which is devoid of meaning and purpose took all the material possessions that Haman had accumulated and turned them into a ditch. He had nothing in his life because he was devoid of the purpose, and that purpose was something which Mordechai exemplified. Now, when someone has a very, very big ditch in their life, there are two things they can do. One is to eliminate that trigger, to eliminate that ditch feeling. What would it take for Haman to eliminate that feeling like a ditch? Get rid of Mordechai. And by virtue of Mordechai, all of his people. What could Haman have done instead? Find something which motivates you. Mordechai has a belief system. Mordechai is connected to something larger than himself. Mordechai believes in something, so he doesn't bow to you. Good for him. Haman, go out there and you find your own belief system. Doesn't have to be Judaism. God has created every single person on the face of this earth, Jew and non-Jew alike, with a purpose, with a mission in their life. The same feeling of purpose that Haman saw in Mordechai, Haman could have seen in himself, had he made the choice to live his life in accordance with those values. You know what? He did. He chose not to. That's his choice. That's not on Mordechai. So Haman is the ditch anti-Semite. And the ditch anti-Semite has two realities before them. Either fill up your ditch or find a way, which is, if you think about it, the backwards way to approach life, but the far easier way to approach life, or eliminate whatever it is that makes you feel like you have a ditch in your life. Explains Jewish mysticism. If we take this view of what anti-Semitism is, ditch anti-Semitism, I feel empty, says the anti-Semite. It leads us to a powerful reality. Imagine for a moment you have a bully. The prototypical playground bully. Why do people become bullies when they're children? What makes a bully? No child is born with hate in their heart. What makes the playground bully? What motivates a child to hit another child, to take someone's ball? What creates the bully? It was usually intense emotional turmoil on their own. They're short of self-esteem, they're jealous of the other kids. Although they're usually bigger and stronger and more powerful and usually have more money than the kids they bully, there's something they are lacking. What do you say to the child who's being bullied? No. Maybe you should somehow look inside yourself and realize why the bully bullies you and make changes in your own life so he won't bully you anymore. No, we don't say that to the victim of the bullying. We say if he's got issues, too bad for him. Let him go speak to the school guidance counselor. Let him work it out. Stand up to a bully. So imagine, what do we say to the Jews in the time of Haman? Ditch anti-Semitism. Someone has a feeling of emptiness in their life because of the lifestyle that you lead. What do we say to the Jew in the 21st century who sees anti-Semitism on the rise and says, you know what? I don't know about how I feel about living proudly as a Jew anymore, because look at how profound anti-Semitism is. The choices that you are going to make or not going to make are never going to change the ditch. The ditch needs to figure out what it wants to do with the ditch. Your choices to assimilate or to somehow back off your Jewish lifestyle aren't going to fill up his ditch. This perspective of anti-Semitism forces us to push the perspective outwards instead of inwards. We are not to blame for anti-Semitism. The Jew wearing the kippah in the street and the young woman wearing the Magen David around her neck is not to blame for the anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is the fault of the anti-Semite. No more and no less. Avilio, read for us, please, text 11, page 64, also from Lord Rabbi Sachs.
Jews must fight and commit antisemitism, but never internalize it. That is easier said. If you're hated, it is never believe you are hateful. that the defeat to the idealizing Jew rarely does. Hate exists in the mind of the hater, not in the person of the hated. Jews have faults, and Judaism is a religion of self-criticism and repentance. But those faults have nothing to do with those which they are accused by their enemies. Antisemitism tells us about anti-Semites, not Jews. One of the mistakes made by good, honorable, and reflective Jews was to believe that since Jews were hated because they were different, they should try as far as possible not to be different. Some converted, others assimilated, yet others reformulated Judaism to eliminate as far as possible all the made Jews in Judaism distinctive. When these things failed, as they did not only in 19th century Germany and Austria, but also in 15th century Spain, some internalized this failure. Thus was born the tortuous psychology known as Jewish self-hatred.
Sadly, we as a people have developed a pattern of internalizing anti-Semitism. In 2018, a gentleman by the name of Michael Shaban gave a speech at Hebrew Union College, flagship school of the Reform movement, in which he actually encouraged, this was before Pittsburgh, in which he encouraged Jews to consider moving towards complete and total assimilation. This will somehow cure anti-Semitism. Assimilate. Don't stick out like a sore thumb. Renounce traditions. I have heard from Jews here in Salt Lake City, 2021, who will say, look, my grandfather walked through the streets of Brooklyn in the 1950s with a kippah on his head. His grandfather before him walked the streets of the shtetl with a kippah on his head. Times, they are a-changin'. We don't wear a kippah anymore in the streets in 2021. That's old timers, the good old days. But now we have to contend with anti-Semitism. We renounce our traditions. And in some instances, we adopt the belief of renouncing our beliefs altogether. You know what's problematic with this? History has shown that it does not work. In fact, I told Ilana we'd come back to this. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, we know that there was actually an adaptation of what anti-Semitism should be. For years, anti-Semitism was against the Jewish religion. So what did the Jewish people do if you have anti-Semitism zeroed in on the Jewish religion? What do you do then? You assimilate, so you're not religious anymore. So actually, in the 19th century, the European ideology changed anti-Semitism from being centered around the Jewish religion and instead made it against the Jewish race. This is not about how devout you are. If you're stuck with the blood in your DNA, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Our history is chock full of eras throughout the times where we've been forced to abide by Torah and mitzvot in secret. Right? There's perhaps no greater era in our history where we think about that than the Marranos. During the Spanish Inquisition, Jews were forced into their basements to observe Torah and mitzvot. Why? Well, put a flag on your front porch, put a sign in your yard. I'm not religious anymore. I'm not religious anymore. I adopt Christ or whoever they're selling on that particular day. I light candles in front of it. It's fine. Why is that an obstacle? Because first they come for the religion. When we assimilate from the religion, then the true colors are shown. It's got nothing to do with the religion. It's got nothing to do with ignorance. It's about the race. So internalizing anti-Semitism, assuming that there is a correct position over here, and we somehow need to change what we are doing in any of these three strains, never really works. Rather, explanations for anti-Semitism must be turned outward. Hate exists in the mind of the hater, not the person of the hated. There is nothing that you are doing or not doing that can somehow inherently change the attitudes of the way someone feels about you. The hate exists in the heart of the hater, not in the person who is the subject of the hatred. Any questions? My Zoom friends, any questions? No. Okay. With that in mind, let's spend the last few minutes that we have tonight together. We've got about 25 minutes left. Now that we know that there's nothing that we can really do to change these attitudes, it's important to realize that there is good that we can accomplish in this world by openly and defiantly expressing our identity. Text 12 is one of my favorite stories in the entire world. Mr. Snow, text 12, page 66.
Ethnic conspicuousness. I was once traveling on a bus dressed in my customary garb, wearing a broad black hat and a black frock coat. A man approached me and said, "I think it's shameful that your appearance is so different. There is no need for Jews in America to be so conspicuous, with long beards and black hats." "I'm sorry, mister," I said to the man, "I'm not Jewish. I'm Amish, and this is how we dress." The man became apologetic. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry, sir," he said. "I did not mean to offend you. I think you should be proud of preserving your traditions."
So yesterday I flew home from JFK. I flew with my friend, my colleague in Kalispell, Montana. If you think Chabad in Salt Lake City has it rough, my colleague is in Kalispell, Montana, Chabad of the Flathead Valley. So yesterday, before we left, there were a number of observant Jews in the Terminal 2 at JFK. So we made a minyan. We davened together. We prayed the afternoon service together. So he tells me that on his way flying to New York, he had to daven in the airport as well. He had to pray in the airport as well. So he prayed in the airport in Kalispell. Someone came over and gave him a comment. Public displays of faith, they have no place in an airport. He says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't praying to God." He says, "I'm aware that the flight that I'm about to get on is going to release a lot of carbon emissions. And so before I get on a plane, I apologize to the climate for the carbon footprint that I'm about to contribute to." Oh, that's beautiful, you know. Unbelievable. If I'm going to stand in the corner of the airport and take out a siddur and daven, no. Jews have no place in America. Don't be so conspicuous. But if I'm going to stand in the same corner of the airport in Kalispell and whisper hocus pocus that I apologize to the gods of climate change for contributing to the carbon footprint, oh, it's beautiful. Tell me more about this custom of yours, about, apologizing for your contribution to the carbon footprint. Do Jews belong in America? Should a Jew feel safe in America? If a Jew should feel safe in America, if the answer to that question is yes, then Jews should feel safe in America, whether they choose to wear black hats and daven in airports and play on trains or not, however they choose to live their lives. And the reality is that when we as Jews live our lives with open identity, when we confirm these realities that we belong here in any way, shape, or form, there is so much good that is actually done in this world, both for our communities and, in a larger sense, for the world at large. Stacey, read for us, please, text 13.
In the first 3 decades of my life, I never wore a necklace. It always seemed redundant to me. But since the Pittsburgh attack, I have worn Jewish scarf regularly, especially in public venues and in situations where I am conscious of being one of the only Jews in the room. The show of pride has become important to me. I want people to know that I am afraid. This is the example set by Mitchell Leshner during his middle school graduation this spring in Vernon Hills, Illinois. Leshner doesn't usually wear a kippah, but the Hallway shooting changed things for the 14-year-old. It was important to make a statement that we're still here and that no matter what happens, we'll still be here, he said.
At times, when confronted with that question, do we belong here? Should we feel comfortable here? The greatest thing that we can do for ourselves to reconfirm that reality that we in fact do belong here. The greatest thing that we can do for ourselves is to take on actions which confirm for ourselves that we in fact do belong here. Which is so contrary to the way the world thinks. The world thinks anti-Semitism happens, we're all going to go underground for a few days. On the contrary, yes, Ila.
What's your position on the question of do we belong here? I mean, what's the position on the belonging versus even if we don't belong here, we could have a right to be here, but we actually belong in Israel. Like, what's your position?
I think that belong is not a question of, from our perspective, it's a question of how the world views it. I believe that Jews belong in America. Now, I don't know that that's necessarily a Jew's most ideal place. I do believe that when Mashiach comes, all Jews will return to Israel because that is our homeland, and in a perfect world, that is where we will all be. Until we reach that point, I believe that Jews belong in America, just like Jews belong in any civilized part of the world that wants to believe that it runs its land in a civilized fashion. Meaning like this. You could take the position that your government discriminates against people. Great, no problem, but be on the record that that's your position. Don't run a country that is open to all and say, well, it's open to all, aside for the Jews wearing the black hats. That's a double standard. So do Jews belong in America? Yes, they absolutely do. And if they belong in America, they belong in America wearing any garb, performing any ritual they like. There's nothing about a Jew wearing a black hat or davening in an airport that should be any more threatening than a Jew who doesn't do that. So I think belong, I understand where the difference of perspective is.
Yeah.
Right. But yes, it's important for us to reinforce to ourselves that we belong here. Then it goes a step further. Not only does that reaffirmation of that belief, does that benefit us, but actually, in the unique position that Jews find themselves in, serves a purpose to all other minorities as well. We're going to come back to the top. Go ahead. Text number 14, page 67. Susan, you're up again.
Wait a minute, Ryan.
No worries. Take your time.
The number 14.
Yes.
A symbol against uniformity. In this fact, perhaps, lay the greatest service of the medieval Jew to mankind. It was a period when authority was triumphant in the intellectual sphere, when thought was circumscribed even more than practice, when uniformity had established itself, not as an accident, but as a principle throughout European life. Had this state of affairs continued unchallenged, progress, scientific as well as philosophical, would have been impossible. The mere fact that the Jew existed and that he preserved the habit of independent thought helped to save the world from this menace. It was impossible even for the least original mind to fail to realize that in the Jewish quarter there existed a class as intelligent, at least as other men were, who yet did not believe as other men, who possessed literature and beliefs and practices which were not like those of the rest of the world, and who refused to pay even lip service to the prevailing ideas. This very fact saved the world from accepting uniformity finally as a natural thing. It stimulated students and thinkers to realize the existence of other spheres to conquer over and above those which were delineated from the pulpit. And if from time to time Europe shook off its lethargy and began to re-examine for itself the wells of human thought, these are big words.
I'm sorry. Propinquity. I botched that too. Don't worry, you're in good company.
Was in part responsible.
The point of text 14, which Susan read so beautifully, thank you, Susan,
Okay.
is that we often see ourselves as the minority of the minorities. I think it's vital to point out that when we lead our lives as proud Jews, not only do we serve that purpose for ourselves, we have the ability to benefit every other minority on the face of this earth, to lead their lives in the same way. Going back to Rabbi Twersky's story, the Amish guy is allowed to sit on the train with his untrimmed beard and his black coat. Do you know what creates the reality for the Amish guy to sit on that train? The way the world has been trained for years, no pun intended, to see the Jew living their life proudly and defiantly, and to inspire other minorities to not conform to uniformity. The third point is the most powerful, and that is tapping into the fact that it's always been our historic role to do so. And here, we're going to fall back on the Purim story one last time. Haman puts out this decree against the Jews. Mordechai tells Esther, don't let the king know that you're a Jew till you absolutely have to. What argument does Haman make to Ahasuerus why he should kill the Jews? The Jews, they stick out like a sore thumb. That's the whole argument, beginning, middle, and end. There is this different nation in our midst. What does Esther do at the climax moment of the Megillah? Esther goes to the king and says, Your Majesty, there has been a decree put forth against me and my people. And what does Ahasuerus say? Oh my God, the queen is a Jew? Abolish the decree, off with Haman's head. Hang on a second. Why does that change what Haman told? Haman said there's a group of people in your midst who cannot conform to society. So what difference does it make if the queen is one of them or not? Explains the Rebbe. Esther took that notion that Jews don't conform with society, and instead of somehow sidestepping it, defending herself against it, spinning it in some fashion, Esther wore that as a badge of pride. And when a Jew wears that with a badge of pride, that is the greatest way to prevail against antisemitism. Let's read text 15 together. All that Esther had to do was to prove that the conclusion presented by Haman following his arguments against the Jews, namely, that it is not in the king's interest to let them remain, was false. She told the king, it is true that this nation is, as Haman stated, a people scattered and separated among the nations. It is also true that their laws differ from all peoples. Nevertheless, despite this, she told King Ahasuerus, you can see for yourself that Haman's conclusion, that it is not in the king's interest to let them remain, is not true. To the contrary, you can see that the uniqueness of the Jewish people is actually a positive quality. This response is succinctly captured in the words Esther spoke to Ahasuerus, may my life be given me in my petition and my people in my request. To Haman's claim that letting the Jews live was against the king's interest, Esther responded, you should realize that this is the nation from which I, Esther, emerged. It is my nation. The people produced me, that raised and educated me, and I conduct myself in its ways. You know well that you selected me from all the finest ladies who were themselves selected from the 127 countries of your empire. If so, you have in front of you evidence that the entire complaint is without basis. Ahasuerus agreed. He was familiar with Esther's superior qualities and exemplary behavior. When he learned from her that her conduct was reflective of the conduct of the Jewish people, my people, he was left with one question. Who in their right mind would seek to destroy a people that produces individuals as good as Esther? It could only be an evil and dangerous person. When Esther tells the king, may my life be given me in my petition and my people in my request, the point that Esther makes is that it's vital that you understand my people have made me who I am. This that you have chosen me, whatever you've seen in me, to make me your queen, these are qualities that are inherent in me only because of the people that I belong to. So yes, are we scattered and different amongst all the nations in your land? I'm not going to argue with that. Haman makes an accurate point, but that should never diminish from the qualities that you see in me, which are reflective of the people that I come from. So what happens when a Jew lives their life as a proud Jew? What happens when a Jew anywhere in the world lives their life as a visible Jew? When a Jew is a good person, when a Jew is able to set an example to those in their midst that are not Jewish, that are curious about what it means to live one's life as a Jew has the ability to be both a good person and openly Jewish and link the goodness to one's identity. The fact that a Jew can go to work and wear a kippah and be an upstanding businessman, that is the greatest way to reduce anti-Semitism in today's world. The fact that a Jew can live openly and proudly in their life and balance that reality of being both a good person and openly Jewish, and to show that one of those stems from the other, this is the greatest way to reduce anti-Semitism. They'll tell the famous joke. What is the difference between a Jew and an anti-Semite? An anti-Semite will tell you that all Jews are corrupt, are dishonest, are no good, are just absolutely the worst of society, except Goldberg. Goldberg, my business partner, is a good guy. I know Goldberg personally, and he's a good person, and he doesn't belong in any of these categories of all how we see the Jews. A Jew will tell you the Jewish people are upstanding, honest, moral, the very best of society. Except Goldberg. Goldberg is a crook. Goldberg is a good for nothing. Goldberg is someone who has absolutely no business being in society. Yes, Ilana.
So I really, really strongly disagree with this. Because in my view, I mean, my father was a director of a Jewish school in Paris. And I grew up with a school that was basically looked at by the police. Yeah, because we would live in the school. And my father would always tell us when we would go out, like this bunch of 10 or 5 teenagers, he would say, be an example. Everybody in the neighborhood know you're coming from the Jewish school. Be an example. So when you go to any place, you have to behave in a way that is better, being a good person, so that people will know that you're, and in my view, that is exactly internalizing anti-Semitism. Because what it means that I have to justify myself. I have to act in a different way, or in a way that is, good or bad. I have to justify myself. The difference between a non-Jew and a Jew, or if we talk about racism, about a white person and a black person, which is exactly the same thing, is that the Jew is always thinking, if you're thinking in those terms, you're thinking of, I have to justify my decision, or is it like I always say, is it good for the Jew?
Let me ask you a question.
In my view, it's like, no.
Let me ask you a question.
Live your life,
Sure.
openly Jewish.
Sure.
But
If you would have lived in Jerusalem and not Paris, so you wouldn't be living in a wider non-Jewish environment, would you act like a good person any less than you did when you lived in Paris?
No.
So a Jew doesn't need to be a good person so that all the non-Jews will see that you're a good person. A Jew should be a good person, period. A Jew should be a good person whether they live in a larger Jewish community or in a smaller Jewish community or in a more prominent Jewish community or in a less prominent Jewish community. A Jew should always strive to be a good person. And one could make the argument that a Jew, beyond just being a good person, a Jew should also proudly display their Judaism so that by default, people can make that connection. We don't be a good person so as to change the mind of the anti-Semite. We be a good person and openly Jewish so that in the event that there might be somebody out there that might observe these two realities existing in concert, it will make a profound impact on them, but that's not why we do. We do it because that's who we are. We do it because that's our responsibility as God's people on this earth, is to be good people, period, regardless of who's watching. And you should be the same good person, whether you live in Bnei Brak or you should live in Paris, whether the non-Jews are going to see or not going to see, you should be the same good person. So internalizing anti-Semitism would say, look, usually you rob banks, but when the non-Jews are watching, be an upstanding citizen. That's doing something strictly for the sake of the hater and figuring out that your conduct will somehow sway their attitude. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is, as a Jew who lives their life in the mantra of being a good Jew, lives their life in the mantra of being a good person, that being a good person and being a proud Jew, that it automatically, without focusing on changing the mind of the haters, goes a long way in affecting the temperament of the world around us. To this point, I want to actually share the following up. I was going to skip it, but I think it's vital. In 1964, there was a gentleman born in Jerusalem whose name was Mohammed Dajani. He was born into a Palestinian family, and he went into the family business. He became a senior Fatah operative. He was somebody who was literally tasked with killing Jews as many and as painfully as possible. In 2014, Mohammad Dajani, who was then a professor at Quds University, led a trip of Palestinian students to Auschwitz for them to see firsthand what had actually happened during the Holocaust. What makes a senior Fatah operative take a field trip to Auschwitz? Well, he says in his own words, text 16, Michael, page 72.
I started going with my father to Hadassah. I had to go to hospital for his chemotherapy, and to my shock, I started to observe the doctors and nurses treating him as a patient. The doctors were very friendly, and the nurses were also. He would bring them fruit, flowers, and chocolate, and I noticed in the hospital, Palestinians are also receiving treatment. That actually awakened me to a great extent to the humanity in the other, and it also awakened my humanity. This was the starting point.
When Mohammed Dajani was taken to Ain Karam Hospital, I wouldn't assume that the doctors on call that day who were treating his father for his chemotherapy said, "Oh, guys, you heard who's coming? A Fatah commander is coming to the hospital. Usually we kill our cancer patients. This one we're going to keep alive." You know what they did? They treated this guy with the same dignity and honor and respect for humanity like they treated all of their patients. And the way they went about their business in a completely natural fashion. The fact that they treated his father like they treated all the other Israeli patients and the other Palestinian patients who were in the hospital, that changed his mind. Not a direct approach to try and sit down and argue with him and get down to the substance of his arguments and figure out what he believes and why he believes it, and so on and so forth. They treated him like a human being, and they went about their business as they would on any other day. And that changed his mind. I want to conclude with one last anecdote. On the ditch complex. Believing that the more intense form of anti-Semitism is ditch anti-Semitism, is born of a complex, might lead us to be somewhat dejected. I think it's vital to point out, to make the point that Jewish mysticism so profoundly harps on, that ditch anti-Semitism is really a corruption of something positive, and it's redeemable at its source. Ditch anti-Semitism is a reality that God put in the life of every single human being, that they should yearn to fill their life with mission and purpose. Sadly, when confronted with this reality, people react in one of two ways. Either they strive to indeed fill their life with meaning and purpose, or if their life is devoid of meaning and purpose, they will seek to eliminate whatever it is in their life that reminds them of that reality. But the good news is that ditch anti-Semitism is actually redeemable at its source. What do you see up there on the screen beside the atom bomb? What does that say? What does that say? Jewish mysticism teaches us that evil is actually not an inherent reality. Evil is not something which exists only on its own. Evil is a corruption of something positive. In a certain sense, Haman's ditch anti-Semitism is a lot more profound than Ahasuerus's pile anti-Semitism. But here's the good news. Pile anti-Semitism is a nuisance. People are annoyed, so they're annoyed. You can't really do much with that annoyance. Ditch anti-Semitism is the corruption of something positive. And the good news is that the more profound factor of anti-Semitism can actually be transformed into something positive. And indeed, it is our sincere hope that the day will come very soon through the accumulation of all our good deeds, when anything evil in this world will indeed be transformed into the goodness that it truly is, into something positive.
Lesson 2, no apologies. 1, the absurd and contradictory claims of anti-Semites have persisted for millennia. Attempting to refute these conspiracy theories may keep some people away from anti-Semitism, but it has proven to be a futile endeavor against hardcore haters. 2. The term anti-Semitism sounds more like a theory and fails to convey that this phenomenon is actually evil wickedness. 3. Much has been said about the root cause of anti-Semitism. One approach sees it resulting from an inner void due to the lack of a true sense of purpose in life. The Jew represents a commitment to living for a higher purpose and dedication to the mission given to humanity by the world's creator. Anti-Semites wish to obliterate their inner emptiness that they are reminded of when encountering the Jew. 4. Hatred exists in the mind of the hater, not the hated. We must avoid internalizing anti-Semitism and imagining that changing elements of our Jewish heritage will solve anti-Semitism. 5. Jews and other minorities cannot be expected to be bifurcated people, severing themselves from their identities in the public sphere. For a minority to have whites in a given place means that it can have a public presence. Being open about our Jewish identity benefits Jews and other minorities. 6. For some potential haters, the best antidote against stumbling into anti-Semitic views is knowing Jews who are upright and of noble character, and noticing that this goodness is linked to their Jewish identity, upbringing, and way of life. To have this influence, we must be open about our Jewish identity. 7. A Jewish explanation for anti-Semitism must allow for the possibility of change, because the Jewish prophets insisted in God's name that anti-Semitism will eventually cease altogether. 8. We can reduce anti-Semitism by teaching the world to avoid an inner void, by embracing God's mission for all humanity.
Next week, lesson 3, the promised land. Next week, we'll be focusing on why specifically the land of Israel is such a hotbed for anti-Semitic commentary. And next week, we'll be having the conversation a little bit based on how we started this week's conversation. If Israel is indeed run by human beings, by flesh and blood, is there a place for legitimate criticism of the land of Israel as a state, as a place in civilized society? Where does that all go? Join us, please. Next Monday, we're back to Mondays for lesson 3 and lesson 4. Next Monday at 7:30, we will be right here. However you joined us this week, we hope you join us next week. Tomorrow, the recording will be going out with a class recap. And please feel free to reach out during the week with any questions. Have a blessed evening.
Thank you.